Hello, hello, testing 1, 2, 3. Sorry for the delay, guys. All right, here we go. How is everyone doing tonight? Let's switch to over here. Okay. And here we go. Okay. Share screen. Where is this? Here we go. All right, welcome everyone. Welcome back to the coding course from the CHYE and JCC Workforce. Hope you guys had a wonderful weekend, Lag Baimer, and we're ready to get back on track with where we're holding with our programming. Let me just quickly check to make sure if everything checks out. Can everyone just give me a quick raise your hand or message in the chat if you can hear me correctly? If you hear me, okay, thank you, great. I see people raising their hand. Excellent. All right, so this is the second week, first class of the second week, and we're going to go on a little bit deeper in some of the concepts of programming that we've started to delve into. But first of all, as has become a bit of a custom around here already, to just insert a little word of something important, something inspirational, I would highly recommend you guys check out this video series some awesome people started called Torah Visuals YouTube channel. And they started a very awesome series on deep concepts in godliness and chassidus and how God created the world. And this one is about coding reality, how God created the world, and how it has to do with programming, and that God programmed into the words and the letters and the ones and the zeros of the universe. Very, very cool. And I definitely see how there are certain concepts in reality and Torah and Chassidus, which are particularly well understood to programmers, because we are people who kind of create realities out of words and codes. And if those words and codes were to disappear for a second, everything would disappear as well. And the whole website, the whole creation that we create depends entirely on the code words that we have programmed into the system. So go check it out. Definitely have a look at it. I'd highly recommend it. Anyway, so with that out of the way, let's delve into what we have in store for week 2. And some of my slides seem to be out of order, so I'll just jump back and forth a little bit. Okay, so we're going to be looking a little bit more on CSS today. After learning HTML, which is in order to build the structure of your page, what is even in your web page, what text is there, what paragraphs are there, what sections are there, etc., etc. We use a separate technology, completely different, to style it, to make it appear in certain ways, to make it have color, make it have a border, make it have a size, etc., etc. Anything that has to do with aesthetics, with how it looks, with the style, that's all the department of CSS. And that's what we're going to be having a bit of a look into now. And it's very important to understand this difference between what we learned last week about HTML and what we're learning now about styling. Because there used to be a bad time in the history of web programming where both of them were kind of interwoven and one was part of the other, and it became a big mess back then. Those were the dark ages of the beginning of the internet, and people had a lot of styling specific code all mixed into the programming and structure and semantics part of the code. So eventually down the line, when they came further along with the technologies, the people realized that it's best to separate these two concerns entirely. It's important to put on one end, in one technology, it's all about HTML, the structure of the page, what do we even have here, what are we even dealing with, even if it doesn't look like anything, even if it looks ugly, even if it looks terrible, just what are the basic building blocks, what are the parts that we have of this page, and then separately, as a completely different concern, what are we going to paint which color and what kind of size and what kind of font and what kind of border and where to position it, etc., etc., was a separate thing, which we're going to learn about now, CSS. That's what the joke is over here. If you see that there's some garbled text over there, that's not a mistake. That's the whole joke, as you guys will soon see very, very clearly. While we're learning and figuring out how CSS works, you're going to come across a lot of these kinds of mistakes where you're trying to style some text to be in a certain kind of way, in a certain kind of situation, but unfortunately it kind of gets messed up, and one text is covering over the other one, and it looks garbled and it looks incorrect. So we're going to have a lot of fun with all that kind of stuff, as we'll see. And that's also what this wonderful joke over here is about. You're trying to style your text to be nicely within the confines of this nice rectangle that you made. And unfortunately, due to some bug or some mistake, the CSS is making the text just pour right out of the fancy box that you made yourself. So CSS as programming generally can be finicky. It's specific. It needs to be programmed correctly. And if you do it correctly, it's going to do what you want it to do. And it can also be done mistakenly, and then things mess up and look weird. And then you just have to look into it, see what the problem is, fix it, tweak it a little bit this way, a little bit that way. And eventually you figure it out and things work more and more. But let's take a bit of a step back. I'm just going to recap a few things over here quickly before we get into that. First of all, this week, unless they changed it already, I have to make sure about that. I think I'm going to be stepping away roughly at about 8:40. It could be that I changed to 8:45, so I'm going to have to see about that. So hopefully Label will jump in at that time to take some Q&A and to answer some questions or to take over a little bit until I'm back. I definitely appreciate the fact that you guys have been joining in the Slack group and joining in the discussions over there and asking questions, getting answers, submitting your code that you've been submitting over there. I've had a lot of fun looking through the submissions that you guys have posted. Very, very well done. It's really amazing to see guys have really hopped how this works, how HTML works, how tags work, how elements work, opening tag, closing tag, boxes inside of boxes, indentation, etc., etc., HTML attributes, and you guys have shown your capability in Googling information, finding information, how to do certain things, and put it to good practice. And I would highly recommend anyone who hasn't done so yet, or anyone who might still be lagging behind in the series. There are recordings of each of the previous classes out there. We'll post the links maybe tonight after this session is over for anyone who needs them. I think there's emails going out for each session after it's done, so you have the link to replay the class. You can still catch up if there's anything you still need to figure out from before. And I would highly recommend you guys really put your tools to the test. Try making stuff. Practice, practice, practice. Make something, make something, make something, and keep making stuff. The more you exercise the HTML muscle, the more familiar you're going to get with it. We briefly spoke about a code editor last week, so I'm just going to quickly recap on that. So, and in the beginning, we started practicing exercising programming code with HTML using either the CodePen website or using Notepad. And the bottom line is that when you create a website, all you're doing basically is you're writing a bunch of plain, simple text in a text file, and you're saving that text file as an HTML file. Really, that means that the file ends with a .html at the end when you save the file. But really, all that it is, it's just a plain text file. You know, it's not a fancy executable file that runs a program. It's not a Word document that has fancy, bold and italic and this and that. It's really just HTML code is plain text, just plain English text that you write, just ABCs. That's it. With the space, with the enter, with the tabs, with all the regular, whatever you type, that's what the text that's in the file, and that's what composes your HTML code that makes your program. So really anyone can make a website by just saving a bunch of text to a file and then opening up that file in the browser and seeing what's the result, what comes out of it. And as years went on, people made some fancy text editors that are helpful and convenient to help you in your journey of making HTML programming code. It shouldn't just be as bland and as boring as a simple notepad, but rather it's, you know, this here, let's have a look over here. I opened up an example of, oh, I'm not sure that's actually being shared on the screen. Let me just quickly restart the share on screen number 2. Let's see if that works. Okay, I'm hoping that works. Do you guys see my Visual Studio Code? Can you guys give me some? Hey, where's my? I don't even see everyone here. Can you raise your hand if you see my Visual Studio Code editor, or do you see my? Oh yeah, you see my Visual Studio Code editor. Okay, good. So this is one code editor that I've been recommending, but you guys can Google around. There are plenty of others actually that you could use that will be just as fine. But this one, you just go Google Visual Studio Code. That's the one that we're kind of inclined to use here in this series. But there's plenty of other ones. You can Google another one that I've used extensively. Very cool. It's called Sublime Text. I think they're up to version 3. You can search around over there and find what that one's all about. Very cool code editor right here. You can see a little bit of a demonstration how it works. You can be editing multiple things at one time. It has a lot of cool features. You can really just Google around, or maybe you've already had some experience from the past, which one you prefer to use, and you can choose whatever text editor you prefer to use. At the end of the day, all it is just saving text to a file and using that as your web page. So having said that, you guys are free to pick and choose whichever code editor you would prefer to use, but I would highly recommend from now on, let's actually stick to programming our websites in a code editor on your local computer, saving a file somewhere in a folder where you have your web projects. And we're going to stop doing like the online code pen. The truth is, you could still use it as you wish. It's still very useful for if you want to just quickly test something online, program a little snippet of HTML and see what the results looks like immediately in the browser, then go ahead and use CodePen. But for the most part, let's say here on out, I'm going to assume that for the most part, when I'm talking about programming, we're saving code in a file in a code editor, and we're saving it to your local computer in a folder somewhere, and then you're opening up that file from the folder in your browser, Chrome or Edge or whatever it is you might be using, Firefox, and testing to see how the code works, how the results look like. So you guys have, like I mentioned, you guys have done a great job at exercising your HTML label. I believe you're in the chat. Welcome, welcome. Thanks for joining us. You're here, yeah?
Yep, I am here.
Oh, excellent. Okay, great, great. Welcome. All right, good, wonderful. Just wanted to add a quick word about semantics. Semantics is a fancy word, but all it really means is using HTML for the correct purpose that it's meant to be used. As you go along and you learn more HTML tags and you learn how to make the list thing and how to make the table chart thing and how to make the form thing and how you make a link and how you make a whole bunch of different kinds of things, you will get more and more used to using the right kind of structure, using the right kind of HTML tag for the right purpose. And it's very, very important for many reasons that maybe for now I won't bother getting into at the moment, but it's very important as much as possible to stick things in the right kinds of things where they would belong, where it makes sense for them to belong. Why? Because they have certain semantics that belong to certain things. If you have, let's say, a paragraph of text that technically, logically, in this particular page, it's a paragraph, right? You could technically put it in an H5 and an H6. You could technically just put it plain out in the open without any tag per se, just in the body. You could really just put it in a div element or a section element or an article element. You could really put it anywhere, but ideally you put it in the right kind of thing that makes sense for it logically. If it's a paragraph, put it in a p tag. And that's called a semantically well-coded web page, so that all the content that's in your web page are in the right kind of elements that they belong to. You could also do otherwise, and there will often be reasons to do so. And chances are, many times you might even go out and browse to other websites and look into the source code, and you'll see there's a lot of random other tags going on there that don't seem to be specifically purposeful. They seem to be just generic, and people do it all the time, let's just say. They do the wrong kind of tags for the wrong kinds of reasons. But as best as possible, it's very important to put them in the best tags possible, which you will see websites doing as well. Maybe for some unimportant pieces of information, they don't care so much, but you will notice for the most important parts of the website, the main focus of what the web page is about, the main heading, the main selling point, those you will definitely find are in the correct kinds of HTML tags. And it's important for you to figure out how to do that as well, because otherwise, let's say, for example, if you really want your website to be found in searches on Google, that's one example why it's important to do this. Google is trying to figure out your web page according to the kinds of HTML tags that you've used. And if you don't use the right one, they might ignore the important part of your website and instead show something very unimportant about your website. And that's not what you want. You want to put the right things in the right elements so it gets recognized. And you'll learn and you'll figure out how this goes as we go further. And one of the best ways to do this, really, in addition to just hearing about it in the course and Googling around about it, best thing to do is anytime you're starting to make a page, you're starting to make some sort of website, even if it's just a business card kind of website, or like a form to submit some information, or a sign, or any of those practice projects that we've done until now. If you ask yourself this kind of question, you're going to be in good hands. If you wonder, how do other websites do this? I want to go out there and find a different website that does a business card kind of a thing. Or they do a sign, a notice that you put up on you print out or whatever. How do they do it? What kind of elements, what kind of HTML tags do they use for this part and for that part and the other part? And you go to another website and you dig into the inspect element and you see how do they do that. And then you'll start learning more and more lessons about how to do so. And that brings us actually to the main program that we are going to be working on in this course, really. This is the goal, the project that we are aiming to build after we're done with this whole series is go on ahead and browse to topbabydeal.com. This is a wonderful little project that I believe our associate over here, Label Hecht himself, I think, has put together. And this is the project that we're going to be working on, trying as best as we can to learn lessons and build something as close as possible to it as we can. As you can see, it's a fairly simple website, really. There's not that much going on. There's not hundreds of buttons and options and sidebars and navigations. It's actually fairly simple, even though it looks pretty neat. It looks pretty professional. It looks pretty put together. And it's a nice basic website. And the best part about it is that it's kind of useful. If you're a parent and you have babies and you need to find the best deals out there for various things, I showed this to my wife, and for a few minutes, she was actually scrolling through here, wondering, I wonder if there's actually a good deal here. And that's the best indicator to know if you created a website that's actually cool and useful, is if people find use in it and say, hey, this is worthwhile scrolling through. So hopefully all of you are going to come up with amazing ideas in the future of all the kinds of websites you're going to be working on. And now we're going to do an exercise of building this kind of website. This kind of website is basically just showing you a bunch of deals for purchasing products around the internet and finding the best kind of deals or the highest or the most interesting kinds of deals that you can get on various products. This is jeans, this is a hoodie, this is some Lego stuff, some chalk, a stroller, etc. As you can see, just, diapers. This is about buying products. And the idea is that if you like a certain deal and you think, oh, that's interesting over here, you click on the link and it brings you to that website and you can look into what that deal is and if you're interested to buy it, etc., etc. And by clicking on that link, we knew that this deal was interesting. So maybe it gets a higher ranking because people felt that this was worthwhile clicking through. So we keep track of that. Oh, another person clicked on it, another person clicked on it, etc., etc. This is the kind of website that we're going to be trying to be building over here. You can see on top, there is this section over here. This is the heading, the header of the website. Here is the main announcement, the main description of what the website is about. On the bottom, we have this footer also that like it's in sync with the style of this website. It's a blue top and it's a blue bottom. And then we have a list of, all the different deals going on. And in each list, we have the image, we have a link, we have the number of which item this is, how good of a deal it is, I guess, or how where does it belong on the list based on how recently it came on the list. And on the right side, we have a thumbs up, thumbs down for how many people think this is a hot deal, how many people think this is good. So if you guys go to topbabydeal.com, an interesting thing to do might be to right-click and inspect and have a look around and see how did Label build this web page, and check it out and see what did he use to make the top navigation bar that has the logo and has some of these buttons on the side. What kind of elements did he use for the main heading over here? The kind of the slogan, the main heading really of what that describes what this web page is about. And I wonder if you could actually see the results of what this looks like on Google. If you do top baby deal in Google.
Unfortunately, it's probably not very high.
So no, so hit, I'll guess it's topbabydeal.com will probably show up, no? Yeah, here we go. So this is interesting. We can see right over here, this text is what comes up in the results of Google. Top baby deal dash baby and kids deals from around the web. Let's go see, where did Google get that out of the web page? Where does that come from? Let's look around in the source code over here. See if we can zoom in a little bit. I'm thinking that's probably coming straight out of the title tag. Here we go. The title tag inside of the head, inside of the HTML, has title, top baby deal dash baby and kids deals from around the web. And it actually has a bit more text over there, but Google did not find that important enough to include it in the search results. But it did have it over here. The second text that the Google results has is actually the heading, the main heading that we had in our web page right on top over here. So you can see over here that Google found that this announced large, big heading text on top of the website over here, that's an important focused piece of text that people want to see when they're searching about this on Google, and Google grabbed that and put it out on the web. How come Google didn't take this text over here up to 85% off Gap jeans? Maybe that's the interesting result. But this is part of that idea of semantics, because we see over here H3 tag, which means that this is a heading tag. Even though it's not the highest ranking heading tag, you know, it's a H3, but there isn't really another H1 around to be seen. And this H3 seems to be prominently up top on the page. Google determined that this is an important piece of text, thanks to the fact that he put it the right kind of content in the right kind of element in the page. So this is one little example how you'll see, if you browse around and you look into the source code of other web pages and you wonder, how are they doing it? How did they make their website correct and proper? Look into their codes and be fearless about it. Ask anyone. Now you're a hacker, now you're a programmer. So don't be scared to wonder, how does Amazon do it? I mean, sure, they're a big, scary company, and I'm never going to be able to make a website as big as them anytime soon. First of all, you never know. Maybe soon enough you could be hired by the likes of them. But more importantly, you totally are able to just look into their websites, go through the code, and see exactly what did their top-notch developers put as the main heading, as the logo, as the links, as the navigation, as the elements, and learn from that a lot of lessons of how you can also create your websites in a similar kind of way, especially if you're intending to make a certain kind of web page and you can find another website out there that already is like that kind of a web page, and you can look and see how did they do it and learn lessons from that. Okay, so now that we know what our goal is, what we're hoping to achieve, and we know some basics about how to do HTML and how to build something of this kind of web page, let's just look into, actually, let's discuss that a little bit. Okay, so hopefully everyone has done a bunch of Googling, learning HTML tags, and there's a lot of them. Okay, so this is a tiny little snippet of a much, much larger page, and this is actually just the top third of the entire page of the full list of all the HTML tags. There are hundreds of them. There's really a lot of them. You might even notice here, there are some of them which are the new tags that we should be using now that we're in HTML version 5. There are old tags that some of us have come across, like the center tag, for example, which are deprecated. Those should not be used anymore. So hopefully you're referring to a lot of references. Hopefully you're doing a lot of Googling and searching up, what is this tag? What is that tag? What is this for? What is that for? It's all right there in Google. My favorite search, as I told you guys, is MDN and then search for anything. MDN, Mozilla Developer Network, they have beautiful documentation on each HTML element and what it's about and what you could be using it for. See an example of what it's used for, and then understand in your own projects, oh, here I would use this kind of element, there I would use that kind of element. And there are such amazing things here. There are things that I haven't even used or heard of myself. For example, right over here, I don't know if you guys could see, but there's this wonderful element called a data list. I've been a professional programmer for multiple years. I have never yet used this data list. It's relatively new, not that new, but it's relatively new. And it has a specific purpose, which you could use in drop-down lists and forms. And I just literally learned about it, days ago. It's pretty cool. And there's a lot of things like that. You keep on learning and going and you might wonder, hey, professional programmer, how come you don't know everything about HTML? But I personally believe, not everyone necessarily believes this way, but I feel that it's okay to defer a lot of your programming intelligence to Google. If you can make it work and you figure it out and you know how to find good answers and you can come up with good solutions anyway, then what does it matter if you know all this stuff by heart in your own head, or if you just know just as well how to find that information anytime you need it? So anytime I need to find out about any of these tags, I have no problem finding their information, and you can be just as close of a developer yourself very, very quickly if you know how to Google for what information you need as soon as you need it. This is an example of a reference out there that lists all the different HTML tags that exist, and when you mouse over each one, it pops up an explanation of what it's about and what it could do. So feel free to Google around. I have found literally hundreds of websites that have beautiful HTML tag references, what tags exist and what you can use them for. And also, pretty importantly, if you want to get started quickly as a beginner developer, there are a lot of what's called HTML cheat sheets, which are basically these single sheets of what you would hide under your desk if you had an exam about HTML and they examine it and they asked you questions. What does this element do? What does that element do? You would want to have this sheet if you wanted to cheat on your lap, so you could read quickly, oh, this tag means this tag means that. So you hang this up on your wall, and anytime when you're trying to remember a certain kind of tag or what it's for, or what its purpose is, just look up on that sheet real quick. Oh, okay, this tag is this tag means that. And you have it as a quick reference right nearby, called a cheat sheet. And you could look anywhere. There's a lot of these beautiful HTML cheat sheets, which you could use. Very useful. So I was talking about semantics before, and this is where we're going to start getting into the idea of CSS. As we've explained, it's important to use the right kind of HTML tag for the right kind of purpose when you build your page. But sometimes, a lot of the times, people don't do that. And there used to be a time on the internet when people made a lot of websites when they used to use tables all the time. Tables is this thing we learned about where you could create charts. It basically makes a grid where you have columns and you have rows, and you can fill up the columns and the rows with data. And it was a convenient structure to use because if you thought of your page in that kind of grid kind of way, like, hey, yeah, my page is basically a grid. I have these two columns on the side, which is like my sidebar. And I have this entire row on top, which is my header. And then I have the main section over here, which is the main content. So I'm just going to make that a table with rows and with the TRs and the TDs, as you guys have looked into and you've practiced already to make tables. And many, many people just abused the idea of a table infinitely and built all their websites out of tables. And there were big problems with that because it was hard for computers and for search engines and for many different purposes to know whether a piece of information is part of a chart of tabular data or whether something is just structure of a page that they use the table in order to make things align in a certain way, not because they really needed to use a table. So we have a lot of different tags now that you use for different purposes. You should use this for this. You should use that for that. But from the era of people abusing tables too much in order to make things look and appear and be laid out in a certain way, we've moved on to the next generation, which is the abuse of the div. So div is another HTML element, which is basically just a blank box. Div is basically when HTML is telling you, look, if you really have no idea what this piece of content is, and you just know that it belongs in its own section, but it's not a heading, it's not a paragraph, it's not a list, it's not a table, it's not a form, it's not an article, it's not a main content. Really, it's none of those things at all. It's not, it's just something that you need in order to divide one thing from another thing, to put one of those boxes in the boxes and your whole page structure. Okay, so then use the div element. The div basically means just one division out of your page. Why is it divided as its own section out of the page? Just because. It's not because it's its own necessarily different content, or it's a paragraph, or it's an item, or it's a link. It's just something that's divided out. And so you'll find hundreds upon thousands of divs everywhere on the internet now, because anytime people are just quickly mocking up a website and they're not sure which element to use, is it going to be structured like this or like that? I just need to cut this out as this is its own part of the website. They just use div all over the place. So let's say you're going through the standard design process. What's going to happen, you as a developer, as a programmer, some developers, by the way, some programmers end up being also designers. I myself, for example, personally, I haven't chosen that path in the end. I've concluded that I myself, not so much the graphic type, but I really could have, maybe should have gotten into it. But in the end, I'm just a coder and I don't do any design. So if you're just a developer, chances are you're just going to get something like the plan of the website, right? Like, this is what the website should ideally look like. This is the width, this is the height, this is the colors, this is the theme. And you could see already the structure out of here. Maybe you'll take, yeah, let me just give myself some annotation over here. Annotate with a, here we go. Okay, this part over here is going to be something like the heading of the website, the header, and you might use a header tag for that. And here is going to be some main content or some announcement stuff. And then here is going to be the next section. And in that section is going to be 4 different sections, etc. So you're already starting to see the HTML divisions of stuff going on over here. And you see me using the word division, which is where people tend to go straight into using divs a lot. So hang on, let me remove this for a second. I almost got a step away, so let me just quickly finish a little point over here. Here's just, just to illustrate that concept, where on the left side, you know what kind of website you want to build. And on the right side, you see, the outline of how you might subdivide the different parts and sections of the website and make this kind of element and make that kind of element. So in the design process, you get basically a design from the designers of what the web page should look like. What are the different sections and parts that you already starting to plan how it should be subdivided. And then your job is, you're the magician that you are, the wizardry that people need out of you is to take that graphic design, that layout of how people want the website to look like, and convert it from, like, I don't know if you can see over here, this is supposed to be a Photoshop on the left side and browser on the right side. You're supposed to magically convert from the design, from the PSD file, from the Photoshop file, into the web page. So that from this design, this plan that people had of how they want the website to look like, you magically know how to convert that into the code, the programming stuff, the HTML, that looks nice in the browser. And of course, it's not only HTML, we of course need to use CSS for that. Oh, and this illustration over here actually helps us understand a little bit more what these different subparts of the website are about, that we're going to be styling with CSS. I am going to be hopping away shortly now. Label, please go ahead and take over, maybe do some Q&A, some stuff like that, and I'll be back shortly.
Yeah, sure. So I think I'm going to take some Q&A, and then maybe I'll also just quickly elaborate on the project that we're going to be trying to build. Excuse me if there's a little bit of noise here. I'm on the West Coast, so my babies are still up. All right, so first I just quickly wanted to go over that website that Yisrael mentioned, Top Baby Deal. The reason we thought this could be potentially a really, really cool project for us to work on, first of all, if somebody doesn't mind to just type that they can hear me well. Just anyone? Thank you. So the reason we thought Top Baby Deal would be a nice option to work on is because it's a very simple concept, and it can also be potentially very, very useful. I'm just going to run upstairs if you give me 1 second here. Okay, sorry about that. So the nice advantage of Top Baby Deal is that it's a very simple website that can be extremely useful, and it can help teach us a bunch of different aspects of web development. So what does it actually do, the website? I built this a few months ago. I haven't touched the code since then, since probably 3-4 months ago. It's just been live and running. What does it do? Every day or multiple times a day, it goes and scours the web and finds any deals that are in the baby category, babies and kids, and it posts those deals on the website Top Baby Deal. So there's some kind of a little background process that goes ahead and finds all the deals. Now this can actually be something you can build that will teach you everything top to bottom, from the database to the front end to displaying, and then you'll hopefully, at the end of this course, you'll be able to build something where, maybe you're into baseball and you can just scour the web every day for deals related to baseball items, or if you're into biking or anything like that. And for some of you that may become a little bit more advanced, maybe in the last class, we'll teach you how to do something like send an automatic email when a new deal comes in, send an email to your email address, or something like send an SMS as soon as a new deal comes in. So there can be a bunch of interesting things. I kind of just want to give you a taste of what you can potentially build at the end of this class. I think it can be very cool. It's really not such a complicated website application to build, and hopefully that gives you a little bit of an interest. You'll notice if you go back to that website tomorrow, you'll see there's new deals, and I literally have not touched the code. I haven't touched anything. I haven't done anything about it in months. So it's just it's a cool concept where you can have this dynamic data. You build it once, and from there, hopefully you'll get some interest and some ideas for other things you can automate. Code is very powerful because you write it once and you just allow it to run and it just works. It does its thing. Every day it goes and it finds the deals. So maybe you have something, maybe you want to get a text message when it's almost Shkia every day, almost sunset, or maybe you want to get a text message when your kid's almost home from school. There's the possibilities are endless, and I think a project like this can really help give you some ideas. Let me take some questions. Ooh, good question. So Sarah asked, where can we find the code to scour the web? So this is a little bit further ahead. We haven't really learned this stuff yet, but there's a concept of the front end code and the back end code. So the front end code, you can just do view page source, like Yisrael was showing you, and you can see all the front end code. But imagine if I could see all of Google's code, right? Then I could just steal everything. So there's obviously a lot of back end in Google and in Facebook. How does Facebook know that I am particularly interested in baby items, and then they show me a sponsored post for baby items from Walmart, right? So there's all this complex back end code logic, which we'll get to soon. More or less, I think the syllabus was sent out, but now we're in the HTML, CSS phase, which is more the front end stuff. Within a couple weeks, we'll start to get into the back end stuff where we actually create a back end server, and we write the code for the server, and that on the back end is what actually goes and searches to find all of the deals. So that's as far as the code that goes and scours the web to find the deals. You can, if you really want to do a sneak peek, there's a concept called scraping or crawling. By the way, that's what Google does. They go ahead and crawl the web to index it, right? How does Google know that Top Baby Deal is even a site? They have to go and find it, and then they read everything that's on the page and they index it to make it searchable. Anyway, that's a little bit more of an advanced topic, but that's just to give you an idea. Happy to explain more in the Slack channel after the class. So in short, where can you find the code to scour the web? If I'm in a good mood, I could send you the code, but I think we'd rather take it step by step. But yeah, you will not be able to find it on the front end. Martin asked about purchasing a domain. So I happen to have purchased a domain, and I also uploaded this code to a server using a platform called Heroku, which perhaps we'll do towards the end of this. We'll actually make sure to find ways to actually upload our code, deploy it is what it's called, so other people can see it. There's free ways to do it. Heroku is a free way we can do it, and hopefully we'll do that. So Maishi asks, can you change the HTML for yourself and it won't change on the server it's hosted? Correct. Anything you do in the browser is just happening in the browser. So like we talked a couple of classes ago, the browser is just a tool that translates the code that was sent back from the server. So now if you take the browser code and you manipulate it, all you're doing is manipulating it in the browser, right? You can go to inspect element, and if you go to your Facebook page and it says hello Maishi or Maishi's account, you can go in, inspect the element, and change the text to say labels account. That's not going to change the data in Facebook servers. If that would be true, that would destroy the whole internet, right? Because then anyone could hack anything. This is just, you're manipulating it the way it's currently translated in your tool. Hopefully that made sense. Happy to explain a little bit more in Slack after. So that would explain also CR asked a similar question, right? When you're changing, when you go to inspect element on the front end, all you're doing is manipulating what you're seeing on your page, because again, the browser is just a tool to translate the code that's got sent back. So if you just go in and you click edit HTML in the inspect element, all you're going to do is change the way you can personally see it on your computer. As soon as you refresh the page, this is the way to test, did you actually change anything on the server? You refresh the page, it gets that code back from the server again, and then you're back to the original code. You can try it. You can go to any website, go to collive.com and change the title of any article to say label is the best presenter, and that's what it'll say, and then you'll refresh the page and it'll be back to the original title. So there's that. Thank you, Leah, for posting that. I think there have been quite a few requests for links to the various cheat sheets. I think Yisrael can probably send you the links, but his general theme that he likes is to say Google it. And it's not just a cliche, go Google it. That's actually how you learn, when you go and find the answers yourself. The best developers are the ones that are able to figure out how to, take a few keywords and go ahead and find the answer you're looking for. So, if Yisrael mentioned HTML cheat sheet, if you Google HTML cheat sheet, you'll find a bunch of options. You may not find exactly the one he posted, but it'll be very helpful. Mendy asks, he only saw an H3 element, he didn't see an H1 and H2. That's a great question. In short, the answer is, this is not a perfect project. It was built relatively quickly as kind of a test for something, and then I thought it would be a good idea to use this as kind of a framework to build our own application for this course. So yeah, it's definitely not perfect at all. You'll find probably a bunch of bugs, but you can try it. You can go in and actually create an account through Google. I mean, you can just click sign in with Google, and then it's secure because you're going through Google, and you can try and upvote and downvote things. It doesn't work perfectly right now. But hopefully we'll be able to get to something very close to that, and you'll learn the skills that you need to be able to go and create your own web applications. How long does it take to build this kind of website for experienced developers? That's a good question, Ari. And the short answer is it doesn't necessarily take a long time. There's a lot of tools. Once you get better at this, you also learn more and more how to use the tools that are out there. So there's these things called frameworks. And, when you go ahead and log into a website, every website in the world, every web application in the world needs this concept of logging in, registering, all these basic things. So no developer themselves is going to go write the code that makes sure to hide the password and hash the password and unhash the password and all that good stuff. You're going to use a pre-existing framework that was built for things like this. So what I did, used the pre-existing framework that kind of gives you the bare bones for a lot of this, and then you layer on top of it the logic that you need. So hopefully that helps explain that a little bit more. So yeah, how long does it take? At this particular project, I don't think it took more than a month of a couple hours every night, probably much less than that. But again, I was using existing tools and existing frameworks that make it a lot easier. I believe last week's homework was mostly just HTML with minor CSS. I think Yisrael already talked about this, but if not, in CSS, there's a couple ways to write it. You can actually add it as HTML attributes, just like you have href is an attribute for an A tag. You can also add an attribute called style, and then you can put the CSS in the style tag. Like he mentioned, I know he mentioned this in the Slack channel, that's not the ideal way to write CSS. Ideally, we like to write it in a separate file. And I think what we're really going to focus on today and in the next class is how to take a web page that looks nice with all the design and everything and write the HTML and the CSS to really make it look exactly the way it should. And in order to do that, we're going to add classes to our HTML, but I'm not going to steal Yisrael's thunder. What's the Slack channel? I will try and post a link sometime a little bit later in this class in the chat as to how you can join the Slack channel. The Slack channel is just a nice place where people can ask questions, we can share our code, we can try and answer. We try and be active. By the way, I wanted to say thank you for everyone who, to everyone who helped out other students in the Slack channel. That's how we'll be able to scale this. There's about 100 people in this class, and you know, I'm doing this very much part-time. I still have a full-time job. Yisrael's a little bit more involved in it, but there's only so much we can answer. So if everyone can help out each other, that would be great, and I appreciate everyone who is helping. DL asked a question about web scraping specifically. The copyright laws about web scraping and the legality of it really depend on how you're using the scraping. As a personal tool, it's almost never an issue. The whole Google is built on the concept of scraping and crawling, right? That's how when you search for the weather, right away they have the weather, or you search for scores or something, it's because, or maybe not scores specifically, but sometimes you'll have little, like what they call rich snippets. If you look for what are property taxes in California, and you'll see that there's like a little snippet on Google with the data already pre-populated, that's from another website. So they actually scrape that data from another website. Now that website's not going to complain because they're happy to have their link very close to the top on Google. So it's kind of complicated. It's a very useful tool, and it's very widely used. And yeah, you just have to check to make sure that you're using it in the correct way. For our purposes, as a personal project, there's definitely nothing wrong. Even in the top baby deal concept, you'll see that I link right back to the original site. So if I got a deal from slickdeals.net, you'll see that the link goes right back to Slick Deals. It doesn't go back straight to, let's say, Best Buy or Babies R Us or whatever. So some of this stuff is a little bit more advanced. Somebody asked, how do you web scrape? That's a very good question. You have to write the code that does it. You have to write the code that goes and fetches all the HTML and CSS from another website. And then you parse it, and then you slowly are able to grab the data out of it. But that's going far ahead into the next few weeks of what we'll be learning. Again, I'm just trying to give you a taste as to what we'll be learning. I will try and post the Slack invite. What else do we have? So I don't want to go too much more into web scraping. There's a bunch of questions about that. We talked about the Slack channel. I'll get you the invite. Somebody asked again about Preexisting Framework. So a framework is basically just someone wrote some code to make it easier. So let's say you're writing code in JavaScript, which again, I don't want to go too much ahead. There's somebody already out there that created a bunch of helper code that makes it easier for you to then build what you're trying to build. So Yisrael, we mostly just took questions from the chat. We spoke briefly about what we're going to try and build with the website, like a deal type website that can actually automatically go and pull deals. And we gave a little bit of a sneak peek into what that might look like and what that might be useful for. But again, that's all a few weeks ahead into the future. For now, we're focusing on HTML, CSS, and hopefully we'll start to get some logic in the next couple weeks.
Very cool. Okay, great. All right. So back to where we were over here. At some point in time, in the Firefox browser, you were able to get this very cool extension, which let you go to any website and to view any website in this kind of 3D kind of way. I don't know if you guys are really seeing the idea of what this looks like. This is basically taking any website and popping out all of the elements, all of the HTML elements that are piled up one inside the other, inside the other, inside the other, to make this section, that section, the other section, this paragraph, this link, etc., this image. And it basically builds it up as if it's like a little city, as if there's like boxes, and you're building up a foundation, and on top of that there's buildings, etc., and you can view it that way. And it gives you a bit of a better insight on what's going on this page, what kind of elements are built up over here. Here's like another angle from a different side. You can see some of these towers could really build up pretty tall if you have an element inside of an element, inside of an element, inside of an element, which is perfectly fine and perfectly valid, and there's nothing wrong with that. And you will probably down the line make some website where you got, you know, some HTML elements piled very deep, one inside of the other, each one of them for a different purpose. This one is because I want to wrap all of these in order so we can style them in this way. And then I'm going a little bit more specific, and then I just want these 3 links to have this kind of thing about them, and then only these 2 links, and in 2 individual links, they should have this thing and that thing. So for all of these elements and different divisions and reasons, you're going to be having a lot of these HTML elements piling up each in this kind of way. And basically, to give one concrete example, for example, here is, you know, what the Wikipedia page looked like, you know, yesterday. Okay, so you have, you know, the sidebar on the left side, and you have the, where's my highlighter over here? You have the description, the heading of the website here with some description text. You have the featured article here with an image, etc., etc. This is like the flat, regular view of how you see a website. So if you're able to use that browser extension in Firefox, you could basically tilt the whole website in 3D and see it look a little bit more like this. So now you're seeing the whole website for its HTML element pile-up sort of thing. And you could see that same, you know, this title that was over here. Now you could see how the elements are piled up next to each other here. Here, when it says welcome to, that's just regular text. So that's a little bit flatter down below. But the word Wikipedia is actually a link. So that's an additional anchor tag, right? That's an additional A tag. So that A tag is inside of whatever this other element was surrounding them. And that results in what you see over here, that this is the regular words welcome to, and here's the word Wikipedia, which was a link. It's still, you know, it's colored in blue, etc. And all the other elements of the website, you know, this image over here, or the featured article, that's this image over here. You see it's popping out because it's an additional tag, an additional element of HTML that pops out over there. So the idea of CSS, which is what we're going to be looking into a little bit now, and there's going to be a lot more looking into it by Googling it, but we'll give you a general overview over here, and then you guys will already figure out the rest. You know, the general concepts is fairly straightforward, and then from there, it's just a matter of looking up the reference of which thing is specifically for what. Very similar to HTML in that way, but it's different kind of code. So CSS, or more specifically, as it's called, CSS3, because there were earlier versions before that had less features and it wasn't so cool. Now we have CSS3, which keeps updating and has even more cooler and cooler features. I don't know if you guys can see over here, but can we zoom in actually? No, I don't believe there's a zoom in feature. But you can see a little bit over here of what the CSS kind of structure looks like. It has some sort of keywords, some HTML programming keyword over here. It has an opening brace, closing brace, and a bunch of code in between that opening and closing brace. That's maybe one useful way how to look at it. There's one programming keyword, opening brace, closing brace, and some CSS stuff on the inside. And then there's another one here, another HTML word, another opening brace, closing brace, and a bunch of CSS stuff on the inside. So here's a bit more close-up look of what it looks like, and then I'm going to explain what we're looking at and why we're looking at it. The idea with CSS, which as we've explained is different than HTML. HTML actually gives you the content, the stuff of the web page, the stuff of the website that you're building. What is actually in there? What's the text? What's the links? What's the content? Etc. etc. CSS is almost just like, it's entirely aesthetic. It's completely just for the makeup, basically. After you have the person that is ready to go and do the act or do the show, So the person is already there and the content is already there. Now you just send the person to the makeup room to get them all touched up and dressed up nicely so that they appear well. That's all that CSS is. The idea behind that is that really your entire web page, make sure it has all of the content that it's supposed to be all about, regardless of the appearance. So that if for whatever reason one day the CSS is broken or it's not available or it's not loading or something's wrong with the CSS, technically speaking, all of your content of your web page is still there. It might not look the prettiest, but it's all still there. Content is one thing, styling and appearance is another thing. And because of that, you're going to be saving your content, your structure of your document in an HTML file. That's the HTML tags that we've been learning about. And you're going to be generally saving your CSS in a separate file that finishes with the extension .css. So now we're evolving already. We used to work only on one file. Now we're going to be involving two different files. The main file that you open up in your browser is the HTML. You're going to have a second file, which is the CSS. The CSS you do not open in your browser. CSS file is not really a browsable file. If you open it up in the browser, all you're going to see is the CSS code. No, the CSS actually gets pulled in automatically by you declaring it in the HTML. So in the HTML, you have all of your content, all of the stuff, all of the text, all the links, and you're also going to say there, oh, and by the way, Mr. Web Browser, please pull in this CSS file as well into this HTML. And the browser is going to go get it behind the scenes, and it's going to read through all of your styling instructions, and it's going to style and decorate everything on the page according to your instructions. And you see, again, over here, the style of how the code looks like is you have some sort of code at first, then you have an opening brace, closing brace, and then inside of that opening and closing brace is kind of like its own section of styling commands. That's just how CSS works, right? Very different than HTML. HTML, it's like a whole hierarchy of indented tags that you start from the left and it builds out more and more to the right, and you have this tag and that tag, the other tag, and you have the opening tag, you have the closing tag. CSS is completely different. It has some code words, then it has an opening brace, closing brace. On your keyboard, it's usually you have to press Shift and that square brackets key. And then you have the opening one and the closing one. The opening one begins your CSS code for this particular code word, and then by the closing brace, that's the end of this set of instructions. Going into a little bit more detail, the first part over here is called a selector. And then you have the opening brace, closing brace, and then in the CSS, you have commands of, I want this to look like this. I want that to look like that. I want the other to look like the other. This is what you want it to look like. You want the color to look like red. Another command could be you want the border to be 1 pixel wide, and it should be this color, and it should be that width. Another thing could be it should have this much margin, or this much padding, or the font should be this size, etc., as we're going to read. But right now, we're just looking at the general structure of a CSS command. You have a selector, and then you have what about that selector. So what's the idea of a selector? The idea is, going back to these illustrations of the page over here, so you built a nice web page. You have a bunch of structured HTML of your document. Now, the HTML is over there, right? Because in CSS, we're separate. It's a separate thing from the HTML. The HTML is one thing. The CSS is another thing. So now from CSS, we're trying to kind of point with a laser and say, that thing right over there, I want that to have this kind of styling. I want that to have this appearance and this kind of graphic effect to it, etc., etc. So you have to have some sort of way of, out of the CSS, to point with your laser and say, I want that over there to look this way. And that's called a selector. A selector is a system how you can look at this entire page and pick out one specific thing, like this little item over here, or this link over here. And you have to have some magic way how to refer to something specifically and say, I want that to appear this way, and I want that to appear that way. Moreover, this kind of laser pointing into the document, laser pointing into your page and saying, I want this thing, I want that thing to appear this way and to appear that way. You also can have ways how to select multiple things. For example, you could have ways how to say, I want all links on this page to appear in this and this and this kind of way. For example, let's say usually links look like blue, right? You remember? Anytime you browse to a web page, usually there's like a blue text with an underline, as that looks like a link. What if for your website, you like that it should be pink instead of blue, right? And you don't want to have to go to each and every specific link on the page and make some sort of CSS styling to say, oh, instead of blue, please be pink. Oh, you too, instead of blue, please be pink. Instead of blue, please be, instead of saying it over and over and over, you can have a way how to make a selector in CSS to point out, you know, with a whole bunch of laser pointers and say, all of these links in the page, make them appear this way. All of these divs in the page, make them do that. All P tags, all paragraphs should have this, that, the other. And there's a lot more complex kinds of selectors that you can do. All third elements that are under a P tag should have this. All H2, H3, and H4 tags should have this and that and the other. There's a lot of different kinds of ways how you can select out of the page a specific set of stuff and say, I want these to appear this way, that way, the other way. But other than that, that's pretty much as straightforward as it gets. CSS is all about saying, this stuff in the page, I want it to appear this way. This stuff in the page, I want it to appear that way, etc., etc. That's all that CSS is. It's a bunch of lists of instructions to the browser to say, pick out these elements, make them look this way. Pick out those elements, make them look that way. That's all there is to it. And you can probably start figuring out yourself a little bit how this works. You know, you see this CSS style over here, right? And it starts with P. If you guess that this means that, oh, we're trying to apply some styling to all of the P tags in this page, well, you would guess right. That's correct. This styling rule over here, this CSS command over here, is going to apply to every single P tag in the entire page. You're basically telling the CSS, you know, the browser, that anything that is a P tag, I want it to have all of these effects. I want that the color should be this kind of thing. We're going to learn all about that soon enough. I want the font size to be 13. I want the line height to be 18. I want the font to be this font, etc., etc. All of these instructions are going to apply to every single element on the page that is a P paragraph. So if it's this paragraph over here, or if it's that, here, let me go to the flat page, here. If it's this paragraph over here, or if it's these paragraphs down here, or if it's this link, or that link, or the other link, whatever it is that you selected in the CSS, that I wanted to apply that kind of rule to it, it's going to follow for all of those things that were in the selector. So now what remains to be seen really is just how do I select certain parts out of the page, and how do I tell CSS to make it this way, make it that way, make it the other way. So I would recommend, first of all, we'll start with the first one. The first part is, how do you single out certain parts of your page? For that, I highly recommend this little CSS game. Wouldn't it be fun if all parts of programming was part of a game? But as it turns out, this one is actually a pretty fun game. In order to select things out of your page, to say, I want that thing and that thing in the page should have the following rules that I tell it to have, we're going to play a little game for this. I'm going to share with you guys this link, and I would highly recommend each of you have a lot of fun playing through it. I'm going to paste this into, I'm not sure if we have a chat today. Is there a chat today? Yes, there is a chat. I'm going to paste it into the chat. Oh, no, there isn't a chat. There's a Q&A. Oh, there's chat. Here we go. Pasting in the chat now. I'll also paste it in the general in the, where is it? In the Slack over here. In the general or course help, maybe, whatever. I'll put it in course help. I'll put it in homework. And all you guys go on right ahead, and I'll go with you as well. Let's browse over to this website and have some fun selecting elements out of your page. So what do we have here? We have a diner that has tables, and it has plates. And this is a good analogy to use to understand this concept of, like, there is a thing, and then there's a thing inside of a thing. And there could be several layers of this, right? On the table, there could be plates, and under plates, there could be pickles, etc., etc. And I want to select these things from here and those things from there, and how do I do that? So over here, he does a little bit of pretense for the purpose of this game. I'm going to try to zoom in just a little bit. Hopefully, you guys can see clearly enough. he does a little bit of pretense here. So we're not using realistic HTML elements all the time over here. We're using a bunch of fake made up HTML elements. As you can see over here, there's an element called a plate. And obviously in real HTML, there's no such element called a plate. But you would translate the same kind of concept if we're talking about a P tag or a H1 tag or a tag or whatever it is. You know, you can understand the same analogy from here. Also, you notice over here, there's a little forward slash at the end of this tag over here. For the most part, I would recommend you just go ahead and ignore that forward slash. There is a reason to it, and some people have even asked about it in the Slack. But actually, as it turns out, it's not necessary. And for the purposes of this course right now, just go ahead and ignore it. Make as if it's just an opening tag and a closing tag, or it's just a tag that doesn't need a closing tag. So it kind of opens here and closes here, and this is a separate tag that opens here and closes there. It's called a self-closing tag. Let's not get into that. Just think about it as this is like an input kind of tag. The input tag does not need a closing tag sort of thing. Usually a lot of tags need, usually the div over here needs an opening div and it needs a closing div. This one does not need an opening and closing. It's just plate is a plate. So if I want to single out both of these plates and say, for those two plates, I wanted to apply a certain blah, blah, blah rules, right? So we're not gonna go right now into the blah, blah, blah rules. We're gonna go into how do I single out these two plates? So the instructions on the side over here say that if you just type in the type of tag that it is, the type of HTML element that it is, that will select that kind of tag. Kind of how we saw before that by typing P, you selected all of the paragraph elements in the entire page. It doesn't matter if the paragraph is inside of a div, inside of a section, inside of a something else, inside of something else. Anything that is a P tag in the entire page will get that styling happening to it. So how do we make a selector? How do we make that laser pointer that points into the document and says, I want those two plates to have the following appearance effects to them? So it says, just type in the name of the tag. So in this case, if you guys want to share with me on the chat, in this particular case, what should I type in over here on the top that will make me select, that will make me single out these two plates that are on the table? What I'm looking in the chat now. Some of you guys say dot plate. It's not necessary to use the dot. The dot is for another purpose that we're going to be learning about soon. I see a few people saying plate. Very good. Correct. Plate is the correct answer, because by saying plate, you're saying anything that is a plate element inside of this document. That's what I want to single out. Let's see if it works. Pressing enter, and the plates have been selected, and we're on to the next level. Wonderful. Now we have a div that has 3 elements in it, or in this particular game example, we have a table at the diner that has 2 bentos and 1 plate. And now the mission is select the bento boxes, okay? So we want the bento boxes, we do not want the plate. What should I type in to get only the bentos? You can see the HTML markup over here. There's a div, and inside of it is bento, plate, bento. How do I single out just the bentos? Bento, very good. Bento, and we got only the bentos and not the plates. Okay, how do we get the fancy plate? So we're getting a little bit more complicated over here. As you can see in the HTML markup over here, we have a div, which is the table. We have a plate which has an attribute. If you guys remember, how does attributes work? Attribute is inside of the tag before the tag closes, right? The tag has an opening angle bracket and a closing angle bracket, and in between you usually put just one word, which is the name of that tag. But you can also add attributes, like when you make a link, you have to say where that link is going to go to. Where do you put that? You should put that as an attribute, part of the href attribute of the a tag. Hopefully you guys know what I'm talking about. If not, feel free to, after this class, go review what we spoke about in class number 2 and Google a bunch of how HTML tags and HTML tag attributes work. So our first plate over here has an ID attribute of fancy. ID equals fancy. And as you can see, that has the effect of giving that plate this blue border. So it's an extra fancy plate. We can even mouse over it, and it has the courtesy of highlighting for us the HTML element and showing us what that markup is. And then if I mouse over the middle one, this is what I see. This one is a plain plate with an opening and closing tag. This one is a plate that also has an ID of fancy. And finally, at the end, we have a bento. So how do I select the plate that is fancy? So if we're going to do the same solution we did in the first and the second, we just type plate, right? Let's try to do that. I'm going to type in plate. So he didn't like my answer. It shook no. And if you noticed, I don't know if you guys can see the animation over the stream, but both of the plates are actually trembling a little bit. They're both telling me no. Because when I type plate, plate applies to both the first one and the second one. So in this case, if I just type plate, it's going to select both of them. That's not what we want. We want to only select the one that is fancy. What's the difference between the fancy one and the not fancy one? Because it has an ID of fancy. So how do we select an element that has an ID of something, right? It could be fancy, it could be blah, blah, it could be 1, 2, 3. Whatever the ID value is, I want to select only the plate that has that attribute. So let's read the side instructions over here. ID selector. Now we're moving on to a more complex kind of selector. This is the ID selector. Select elements with an ID. How does it work? You use the pound symbol, and then you type whatever the ID of that thing is. And that selects the element with a specific ID. You can also combine the ID selector with a type selector. And it shows you some examples over here. Examples. The pound symbol, the hash symbol with cool, selects an element with ID equals cool. Get it? So if you want to get something that has an ID attribute of cool, you should do hash cool. And that for CSS means get me the element that has the ID attribute of cool. Or another example here with the element name, which is like what we did before, plate, which is the name of the actual element. If you do whatever the element is, plate, P, H1, or in this case, UL with hash long, that selects a element of type UL that has an ID attribute of long. Okay, this might be a lot of information to chop, but many of you hopefully are chopping it, and if not, just review it over, think about it. Again, this is a kind of crash course where we're stuffing in a lot of information very, very quickly. So before we selected things by just saying the name of what type of element it is, now we're selecting things by what attribute of ID it has by doing the hash symbol. So let me look in the chat. How do I select the fancy plate? I want to see at least 2 different options, 2 different ways of how I can do it. I see hash fancy. That is correct. That is one correct answer, hash fancy. Who can tell me another way how to select the fancy plate? Plate hash fancy. Very good. Plate hash fancy. Again, if we only do plate, that's going to select both plates. If we only do hash fancy, that's going to work because there's only one plate, that one single plate that has the ID of fancy. But another way how to do it as well is to be more specific. Hey, browser, I want to get that element over there that not only check to make sure that it has an attribute of fancy, also make sure that it's a plate. Because if, let's say, there's a div that has the idea of fancy, or if there's a bento that has the idea of fancy, I don't want that one. I only want to make sure it's a plate and it has the ID of fancy. That's the one I want to get. So I'm going to do that version, plate hash fancy. Notice there's no spaces over here, and in CSS, in this particular case, spacing is important. If you made an extra space over here, some things wouldn't work actually. This would do something else, as we're going to learn very soon in one of the next levels. Space actually makes a difference. So make sure this is all squished together without any spaces. Plate hash fancy. I want to get the element of type plate that has the ID attribute of fancy. The ID attribute is special. It has some special meaning. There are a lot of different attributes for a lot of different HTML elements. There's the href we learned about. There is target we learned about. There's a bunch of different attributes that you can put on many different elements. ID is special for various different reasons that we're going to learn. And one of the reasons why it's special is because in CSS, it's reserved to that special symbol of the hash symbol. When you say hash symbol, that's as if you said, I want the one with ID equals whatever it is that follows that. Press enter, and we got specifically the plate that had fancy hash in it. All right, we're getting more complicated over here. Let's zoom in on the HTML for a second, if we can see it clearly. Here's the div, that's the table. Here's where it opens up, here's where it closes up. And inside the div, we have a bento, we have a plate, the opening plate, closing plate, and we have another apple on the table, directly on the table. And inside the plate, we have an apple. So we have two apples. You have one apple that's on this plate and another apple that's straight up on the table, as illustrated right here. Bento, plate with an apple on it, and an apple straight up on the table. So again, if we use the type selector, which means just get me the apples, if I type an apple, that's not going to work because it's going to get me both of those apples, the one that's on the plate and the one that's on the table. But the mission that he's telling us to do is select the apple on the plate. How do I get the apple that's on the plate? We have another instruction over here. Descendant Selector. Okay, so we already learned we're learning our third CSS selector right now. Our third way in CSS how to tell the browser, I want that thing in the page so that you can instruct it what to make it appear as, right? Like in this particular case, if you wanted this apple to look blue, right? But you wanted the other apple on the table to remain red. So you only wanted to get that apple and you wanted to instruct CSS to make it look blue. How are you going to single out that specific apple and not the other one to make it blue? So for that, we use one way how to do it is to make the descendant selector. Select an element inside of another element. There is a way in CSS how to say, make sure that what you're selecting is inside of something else. So if I tell CSS, get me the apple that is inside of the table, that's going to get me this one over here because this apple is inside of the table. Hey, CSS, get me the apple that's inside of the plate. That's going to get me this one over here. This apple is inside of a plate. How do we do that? A space B. So here's where you can see that space actually matters. This is important. Space has meaning. Don't just put any spaces over there for no reason between the different elements of, the different parts of the selector. Because anytime you put a space, you're saying, please get me the descendants of. Please get me some of the elements that are inside of. That's what space means. Select all B, which are inside of A. B is called a descendant because it is inside of another element. Examples, P strong selects all strong elements that are inside of any P. ID of fancy, space span, selects any span elements that are inside of the element with the attribute ID equals fancy. All right, again, a bunch of information very quickly, but you know what, you guys yourselves go and play through this game again after we're done over here to really try to solidify the lessons about it. And most importantly, we're going to inspect some web pages and we're going to exercise writing our own CSS to see how the CSS singles out elements in the page, says that one, that one, that one, that one, and please apply these appearance rules to it. So the mission is to select an apple that's on the plate. Please give me some suggestions. How do I get the apple that's on the plate? Someone tells me plate A space B apple. Let's try that. Plate A space B apple. Didn't work. Give me another example. Plate space apple. Plate space apple. So why didn't plate A space B apple work? Well, because plate A doesn't exist on the page. The CSS looked around for an element, for a tag that's called plate A, and it didn't find any of that sort. So it said, sorry, I can't find an element that's called plate A. Neither did it find anything that's called B apple. So, make sure you're typing correctly, the right element that you're trying to find on the page, spell it correctly, and it's going to find that element. So when I type plate space apple, what it seems like I'm telling CSS is, please find a plate, and then find as a descendant of this plate, look inside of that plate for an apple, and give me that one. And I'm going to press enter, and it works. That is the correct way how to do it. Again, just to go real quickly back here, to select something inside of another something, type in the first thing, space, the second thing, and that's going to give you that thing that's inside of the other thing. Plate, space, apple, gives me the apple that's inside of the plate. As you can see, the HTML markup over here, apple is inside plate. This is going to give me any apples that are inside of plate. All right, we're getting more colorful here. We have a table. We have 2 plates. One of them is fancy. Both plates have a pickle on them. And there's also a bento with an orange on it. So the mission is to select the pickle on the fancy plate. So now we're not learning any new selectors, but we're going to have to use a combination of some of the things that we already learned. How to select things by their type, how to select things by their ID attribute, and how to select things that are inside of other things. So how do I select the pickle that's inside of the fancy plate? Let's examine the HTML markup over here. We have our table. We have our first bento that has an orange on it. We have our second plate over here with the ID fancy that has a pickle inside of it. And we have another plate that has pickle inside of it. Give me some suggestions, guys. Okay, you guys are saying plate hash fancy space pickle. Plate hash fancy space pickle. Another suggestion I'm seeing here is just plain old hash fancy space pickle. So let's examine both of these. What might they mean? Hey, CSS, please find a plate. Oh, okay, says CSS. I see one plate over here. I see another plate over here. Give me the plate that has the ID of fancy. Oh, okay, that's a little more specific. So I'm not going to find this one because this does not have the ID of fancy. But I am finding this one. This one has ID of fancy. Okay, what now? Now look for its descendants. Okay, what should I look for? Look for a pickle that is a descendant of a plate that is fancy. Let's examine it if we did without the plate. Okay, CSS, please find me something that has the ID of fancy. I don't care if it's a plate. I don't care if it's a bento. I don't care if it's an orange. Anything that has the ID of fancy. Okay, so CSS looks through the page and says, oh, here, I found a plate that has the ID of fancy. What about it? Get me its descendant pickle. All right, so the truth is either of these solutions would work. Either plate hash fancy space pickle or just hash fancy space pickle. Space pickle, I like that. We're talking about space pickles. Okay, that worked. Next. Select small apples. All right, let's see how this works. This is now we're going to learn another selector. Class selector. Select elements by their class. So as we're going along here in CSS, you could see how I'm starting to hope and assume that you guys have already enough of HTML. You already know enough about tags. Hopefully you already know enough about attributes that, you know, we just casually went through the ID attribute over there. The ID attribute is special. It has this hash symbol for CSS. Now we're going to learn about another special attribute that you can put all around your HTML tags, and that is the class attribute. If you're not sure about the class attribute, let's just Google it. MDN class attribute. And the same goes for the ID attribute, MDN ID attribute. All right, let's have a look. The ID global attribute defines the identifier ID, which must be unique in the whole document. Its purpose is to identify the element when linking using a fragment identifier, scripting, or styling with CSS. So you can see an example over here that we have some elements in HTML and we're using the ID attribute, and that identifies this P tag. This P tag now has an ID. My ID is exciting. This other P tag doesn't have any particular ID. It's just, I'm just a P tag, that's it. I'm just a paragraph. This one is, I'm a paragraph and my ID is exciting. And now let's have a look at the class attribute. The class global attribute is a space-separated list of case-sensitive classes of the element. Classes allow CSS and JavaScript to select and access specific elements via the class selectors or functions like the DOM method, document get element by class name. So in a way, it's kind of similar to ID. It's a way of giving different tags kind of like a category. So this P has no category, right? This paragraph over here on top, I'm just a paragraph and there's nothing special else about me. This paragraph, I'm a paragraph and my category is note, and also the category of editorial. It's kind of like it's in a category. Then this paragraph over here, also no categories, nothing special about it. This paragraph here has also the category of note. And what's interesting is that this paragraph over here and this paragraph over here, they both share a category. They both have the note category. This guy's in the category of note. This guy's in the category of note. How? Because we did an attribute, an HTML tag attribute of class. Class, as you can understand, right? We're putting things in a certain class. So that's the fancy term, is call it a class, but I'm kind of borrowing the word category. Anytime you give something a class, you kind of put it in a certain category. This paragraph now is in the category of note. Who cares? Don't worry about that too much. Eventually, we'll find out about that down the line. But now, we're finding out one important way how we care. We care because this is one way how you're going to be selecting things with CSS. You can select things that are out of a certain specific category. And it's different than the ID thing. The ID thing, you can only have one in the entire document. As we read over here, the ID global attribute defines an identifier which must be unique in the whole document. So as you can understand, you can't have a category like this, right? A category could apply to many different things, right? Shoes and socks are all in the category of footwear. That's not their identifier. That's not something that's unique for them specifically. But an ID, an identifier, needs to be very specific to each one and every. There can only be one ID exciting in the whole entire page, but there can be multiple of the category note in the whole entire page. So let's say I make about a bunch of paragraphs in the page, and I know that with some of them, they're going to be in a specific category because at a certain point in time, I'm going to want to make all of these things that are in this category to have a certain color or a certain background. And how am I going to pick out only those specific paragraphs, right? There's a lot of paragraphs on the page, but I only want to pick out this one, that one, the other one. So I'm going to put them all in a certain class. I'm going to give them all those specific ones that I care about. I'm going to put them in an individual class. You're going to be in the class note, or you're going to be in the class editorial, or you're going to be in the class whatever you want. As it turns out, you can make up your own classes. Whatever you put inside over here, inside of the opening and closing quotes of this attribute, you can put in whatever you want. You can make up your own classes, as long as it's something that you remember and that you're consistent about and that you can work with. So that now in your CSS, you can say everything of category note is going to have the following styling rules. So back to over here, we can see we have a bunch of different apples, and I'm going to prove that by typing apple over here in my little CSS editor, and I'm going to press enter. And if you're able to see the little vibrations, you're going to see all apples are vibrating, because I'm now pointing my laser pointer to all apples in the entire page. And all those three are apples, so it's valid that they're getting selected. Problem is that we only want to get the small apples. So they're all of type apple, but only some of them are in a certain category of small. As you can see over here, this apple is just plain old apple, so that's a big apple. But this one over here has an attribute class of small, so that's in the category of small. Then we have a plate, and in this plate we have another apple, and this apple is also small. How do we select everything out of a specific category? We know how to get something by its type. We know how to get something by its ID attribute, not its class attribute, its ID attribute. We know how to get things that are inside of other things. How do you get things that are in a class, that are in a category? Select elements by their class. Dot, it's very small over here. You have to see the little period over here, period, and then the name of the class. You use the period symbol. Kind of like we use the hash symbol to get the ID. We here, in this case, we use the dot symbol to get something by its class. The class selector selects all elements with that class attribute. Elements can only have one ID, but many classes. Examples, dot Nido selects all elements with class equals Nido. And you can make up, again, you can make up your own categories, your own classes, whatever you want them to be, as long as they start, I think, with an alphabetical letter, and they continue with alphabetic letters or numeric numbers or a dash symbol or an underscore, maybe a few other little things like that. But other than that, you can name them whatever you want to name them. So can we get some suggestions? How do I select all the apples that are small. Looking for answers in the chat room. Okay, I'm seeing suggestions to get dot apple. Dot apple. It's not working. Why is it not working? Because the dot symbol is telling me get something that has this category, that has this class. None of the elements in this entire page have the class of apple. Because as it turns out, apple is not a class, apple is not a category, apple is a type of tag. It's like it's a P tag, it's a H1 tag, it's a right? It's one of the elements of the HTML itself. So that's not a class, right? Let's not confuse. What is the type of thing that it is? What kind of tag is it? Versus what category have I named it in the class attribute? So that's the reason why dot apple wasn't correct. But let's see another suggestion over here. Dot small. Okay, dot small. We're telling CSS, please find everything that has the small class. And if we press enter, we'll see that those two apples fly away. We got the check. That's correct. Let's see some other suggestions. Very good. To YA, apple.small. Hey, browser, find everything that's an apple. Okay, I find everything that's an apple. What about it? Oh, make sure it has a class of small. So that's another way how to be more specific, right? What if there was a plate that was small, right? If we only did dot small, we would get everything that has the category of small. We might even get a plate that's small, right? And we might, maybe that's not what we want. If we only want to get small apples, so we can be specific and say, get me all small apples. It happens to be in this case that the only things that are small in the entire document, in the entire table over here, is really just those two small apples. But if there was anything else that's small, it would be more correct to be more specific and say, get me apples that are small. All right, let's go a little bit further. I don't think we're going to go through all of them. Maybe let's do another one or two. And then we'll go back to a few more other things that are important before we finish the class today. Let's select the small oranges. All right, let's look at our markup over here. We have the table div. We have an apple. We have a small apple. We have a bento. In the bento, we have an orange that is small. Then back to the table, we have another plate on the table that has a regular orange that isn't small, right? This orange over here had a class of small, which puts it in the category of small. But this orange over here is just plain old orange, so that's just a big orange. Next, we have on the table another plate, and we have another small orange. So if you had this kind of web page, right, which has this section, and in this section you have some stuff, and then 3 more sections. And in those sections, you have some stuff and some stuff and some more stuff. How are you going to single out only this stuff in this section and this stuff in this section? And the common denominator between them is that they're both oranges and they're both small. How do we select the small oranges so that we can say those things over there, I want them to have the following styling rules? So what does it say over here? Combine the class selector. You can combine the class selector with other selectors, like the type selector. That's kind of the difference that we did in the last one between just saying dot small or saying apple dot small. So what do you guys suggest I do over here to select the small oranges? Some of you guys say dot small. Okay, dot small. That's not going to work because in this case, we do have something else that's also small, and we don't want that. And that is over here, the small apple. So if we tell the document, give me everything that's small, we're going to get some things that we don't want, right? If you want to paint all of them blue, it's going to paint the wrong thing blue because we selected too much. We didn't want to get that small apple over there. We only want the small oranges. What do you guys suggest? Take your time, no rush. Here we go, orange.small. Orange.small. I see a question over here. Don't you need a space after the orange? Good question. Are we looking for something that's inside the orange? Because the space means we're looking for something that is descendant, right? So if you wanted to, you could say, give me oranges that are under a plate, or that are under a bento, right? If we said bento space orange small, then we would, you see, only that orange is shaking now. Only that one, not the one that's on the plate. Because I specifically says only find the oranges that are small that are in a bento. So don't forget, that's what the descendant selector is. But we want to get both oranges across the board. Well, no matter what plate or bento they're on, then we do orange dot small. Select the small oranges in the bentos. Okay, how do I get the small oranges that are in the bentos? The first suggestion here, bento space orange small. Bento space orange dot small. Okay, dear browser, please look for a bento, go inside of it, find an orange, make sure that orange is in the category of small. That's what the dot means. It means it has the class of small, and get me those. Press enter, and you guys got it right. If you're following along, that's great. If not, don't worry about it. Go to this website yourself. You'll play it after the course, and you'll figure it out as you go. Next, let's do this last one, and then that'll be enough for now. Comma Combinator. It seems complicated, but it's actually pretty simple. How are you able to tell CSS the idea of and also? Meaning, let's say you want to paint things blue, right? But you don't want to have to say, dear CSS, find me all of the plates and the pickles and paint them blue. And then you have to go all over again. Dear CSS, find me all the bentos with the pickles and paint them blue, right? Instead of repeating yourself twice, can you tell the browser, hey, find me this, 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 that, and the other, and also find me this, 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 that, and the other? Can we say and also in CSS? And apparently we can by saying combine selectors with commas, right? A comma B, meaning you have A can be anything that you want to select, bento space, ID this, class that, whatever A might be. Then you just separate it with a comma, and then you put a whole nother story of find me a this inside of a that inside of the other. Examples, P, comma, and then dot fun. By the way, notice that there's a space over here. In this particular case, you can put as many spaces as you want after a comma. The space after a comma does not matter. If there's a space inside of the rest of your selector, that means get me the descendant. But in this case, after a comma, the space does not matter. How are you going to remember that rule? Because you're going to practice a lot of it, and it's going to make sense as you go. After a comma, you can put spaces. It doesn't mean anything. In the middle of a selector, a space means get me the descendant of that thing. So in this case, for example, select all the plates and bentos, right? If I want to get the plates, I would say, get me all the plates. If I want to get all the bentos, I would say, get me all the bentos. How can I say, get me all the plates, and then also get me all the bentos? They're two different tag types. What are you guys' suggestions? I'm going to take the first one over here. Bento, comma, plate, comma, bento. Oops. Yeah, let me just type it in. Plate, comma, bento. Or, just for demonstration purposes, plate, comma, space, bento. Don't worry about this space over here. It doesn't actually mean look for a descendant, because in this case, after a comma, space does not matter. However, if you go into bento and then you say something else and something else, there the space does matter, because that means find me a descendant. But right after a comma, the space does not matter. So I'm telling CSS, please find me plates. Okay, I can find you plates. Oh, and by the way, I have some more. Totally new sheet of, a totally new list of what you should find me. Comma means open up a new paper in your notepad. Find me also all the bentos. So comma is basically like, instead of repeating yourself all over again from the beginning, you can, in one phrase with a comma, tell them multiple things to find. Find me all plates, find me all bentos. That's what comma does. Oh, this one's pretty easy. Universal selector. You can select everything using the star, the asterisk symbol. You can select all elements with a universal selector. Examples, P space star selects any element inside, which is a descendant of all P elements. So for example, over here, select all the things, right? Everything is inside of the div table, right? So if I just do star, if you got it right, that should not work, right? Oh, it did work, but I think it shouldn't work. Because if I said star, that should lift up the table as well. I think what he really wants me to do is say div space star. Get me everything at all that is inside of the div. Does that also work? No, he doesn't like that. All right, well, that might even be a bug in their system. They actually have a page where you can submit issues. But anyway, they would just want you to get used to the idea that if you type star, it selects just everything. So you can apply a certain rule of styling to absolutely everything in the entire page by using the star thing. Just a little footnote, don't use it generally. It's not a good idea to use that one, but it's useful to know about. Okay, this is enough practice for now. It gets more interesting as you go deeper into it. I'm very curious to know how many of you guys can play through this entire thing, learning the rules of CSS and coming out the other end, having learned all the different ways how you can select stuff in the page. But the idea over here was to get used to the concept that with CSS, you can tell the browser, hey, I made you a page over here. You know, it has structure in it. It has this part, that part, the other part. And I want you to find and single out for me this specific thing that's inside that specific thing, that has this specific class attribute, right? It has this specific category, so to speak, or it has this specific identifier, which you can use the hash symbol for. And now we want to apply some rules to it. And applying the rules is actually just as simple as looking up in the references and finding out what rules can you apply. You know, in this example, the color rule means make all the text have this color. This is the name of what you want to make happen in CSS, and this is the value of what you want it to be. And there's probably no better way to understand how that it works and what that is exactly than to inspect a page and just see the CSS happening right there. Here we have some CSS happening right here. The beautiful inspector shows us the entire insides of the web page. We have the HTML on one side, and we have the CSS styling on this other side. And this guy is saying dot page underscore title. This class over here, I wanted to have these kinds of stylings. I wanted to have a border bottom of one pixel solid light gray. What does all that mean? Let's Google it. Border bottom, border bottom, border bottom. Okay. MDN, CSS, border bottom. Let's look it up. Border bottom, CSS. The border bottom shorthand CSS property sets an element's bottom border. It sets the values of border bottom width, border bottom style, and border bottom color. Here you can see the specifics of what you can put inside of that CSS rule that you're typing up in your file. You can make it solid, dashed with a color. You can make it a certain size with a certain solidity. And as you see over here, as I'm clicking these different examples, it's showing over here the results of what that looks like. This is a box with a border around it. And now we're styling the bottom border. If I do dashed red, I don't know if you guys can see it clearly, but there's a dashed red border only on the bottom of this element. You see, we gave this element now some appearance. CSS is all about giving a styling, an appearance to an element on the page. Before, it was just plain, here's an element, and here's some stuff inside of the element. Now, we're giving it some additional styling to it. Give it a nice dashed red border on the bottom, because that's the style that we want to have in this case. This gives it a 1 rem, that's a certain unit of measurement that you guys will see in the documentation about, which is pretty thick, as you can see over here. Give it one solid border of 1 rem at the bottom. Then this is, give it a thick double of this color. This is actually a programming coded way of how to describe a certain color. I'm not sure I'm going to have the time right now to explain how that works. But let's just say in CSS, there's a code way how to express certain colors. If you want to say green, you can express it in the code 00FF00. If you want to say red, you can express that in something like 660000. And there's a bunch of codes like that that make different colors happen. And there's a whole explanation about how that works. But I would recommend you guys do that as a homework. Maybe Google, how does colors work in CSS? How do you make a certain specific color? How can I find out what the code is for that color? If I want it to be crimson red, or it should be light purple, how do I find out what the specific codes of the colors are? And there's a bunch of colors in CSS actually that you can just write with the plain English word. There aren't a lot of these, as you can understand, right? It's not going to have every single light peach bone color, description existing in there. It only has a limited number of these that you can use. But then the rest of all the colors, including your fancy peach cream bone color, can be expressed with this code thing, because that has the full gamut, the full range of how you can describe the color. There's another way, a coded way, how you can describe colors, which is with this RGB kind of thing, with 3 different numbers in it, 4 different numbers, because this has opacity as well. Anyway, a lot of homework to be done over here, looking up how can I style my page, what are some good effects I can do, and really that's the question over here, is how to discover awesome CSS stylings. Right now that I know that I'm going to be writing, okay, first of all, let's cover the technicalities of this. Right now, until now, we're talking about creating an HTML file. You're going to save that as an HTML file, and you're going to open up that HTML file in the browser. Now we're learning a new thing. You're going to be creating a second file, put it in the same folder as your HTML file, save it as a something.css, and save it also as a text file inside of your folder that has the HTML. So now we're going to have 2 different files in the folder. One is HTML with all the HTML structure, and the second one is .css with all the styling. And then the way how to connect the two, so that when you open up your HTML page, it's going to have these different stylings happening inside of it. For that, we're going to use the MDN style. Is it the style or is it the link? See, even I can't remember that off the top of my head. Let me quickly look up. Is it style with source, or is it link? Yeah, no, it's not style. It's link. Inside of the head, we have to put a link. External resource link element, right? This is a element. HTML external resource link element specifies the relationships between the current document and an external resource. We are inside of an HTML page, and we want to tell the browser, hey, go get me this CSS stuff that's in this other file that's not part of our HTML file. This element is most commonly used to link to style sheets. Okay, so this is how it looks. And most often it is put in the head section of your web page, right? Let's remember, how do we make an HTML page? We have doc type on the top. We have the HTML opening tag, the HTML closing tag. Then on top, we have head with title and other stuff. And then under that, we have body with all the actual content of your page. In the head section, right under HTML, in the head section, that's usually where we put in the, sorry about that. That's usually where we put in the, the link element to link to a additional file that's in your project. And as you can see over here, you have the opening angle bracket. You just type in the word link. You need to have the attribute, the href, which is the link. How do I find my other file? How do I link to my second CSS file that I want to style this page with? And that you have to type in the path of how you go find that CSS file. In this particular case, you can see over here, he says /media, /examples, /link element. In our case, if you're going to have the HTML file and the CSS file right next to each other in the same folder, in that case, you don't have to have any slashes really. You just type in straight up the name of the CSS file, like something.css, straight into the opening and closing quotes. And it's also good to add this additional attribute, which is what is the relationship of that other file to our HTML file? Why are you telling me about this HTML, about this other file? And the answer is because it's a style sheet. This is a sheet that's going to be describing stylings for this particular page. So you guys can pretty much just Google this, copy it into your HTML file, and you can go right ahead and start editing that separate CSS file and putting into it this kind of stuff that's going to be instructing the browser how to style different parts of your page. Over here, you can see we have a type selector, right? A tag selector. It selects anything that's a P paragraph. What is it going to do to it? It's going to make its color to be this color. It's going to make its font size to be 13 pixels. It's going to make its line height to be 18 pixels. It's going to make its font family to be this kind of font. And here's a fun thing that you guys can do to play around with this and get an idea of what you can play around with. Let's open up this page where we opened up the inspector. Let's go to something that has, here we go. Okay, here we have a very simple to understand CSS selector over here, h3, comma, h3. Okay, it's looking for anything that has a class, a category of h3, comma, or also all of the tags that are actually a tag of h3, right? Don't confuse between what's a tag and what's a class selector. This one has a dot beforehand, a period, so that selects anything that has a class of h3. But this also is selecting anything that has a tag of h3, such as this title right on top of the website over here that we see over here, the h3 tag. And it's saying font size is 1.75 rem, whatever that means. Let's try to mess around with it. What happens if I make it 2.75 rem? I'm going to type that right into the Chrome inspector right over here just to play around with it and see what it does. I typed in 2, and as you can see on top, the text grew much larger. What if I type in 3, 4, 5? It's going to become pretty huge based on the styling that I put in here. So it's pretty cool that in the Chrome inspector, when you do right-click inspect and you get these developer tools that you can see the behind the scenes of the web page, you go to the Elements tab over here, you're able to mess around and play around with these things. And you're kind of hacking the website in a way. It's not really actually hacking the website, because the website will remain the same, and other people that visit the website are just going to get a fresh new copy of the website without any of your hackings. But for you in your browser, when you browse to this page, you're able to open up the inspector and play around and see what happens if I do this, more numbers, less numbers. I'm using my arrow keys to make the arrow up and down, to increase the numbers, decrease the numbers. You can play around with this a lot and test and see what happens if I make it blue, what happens if I make it green. And you can play around with this in your own project, the test projects that you yourselves are going to be doing. Let me just quickly wrap up by saying what the next major homework is going to be. You guys go ahead and try to build your own version of this page. Try to make a page in plain old HTML, okay? Does not have to be fancy at all, does not have to be perfectly matching. In this case, try not to copy too much from this website to your website, although again, if you do that, that's fine. Go ahead and do it. It's okay. As long as you're doing it and you're understanding what you're doing, you're still learning, you're still figuring it out. And try to make the correct HTML structure for how to make this kind of page. So you want to have a heading on top. Maybe you want to make the, the top bar section where you have some buttons, you have a logo. Maybe you want to make the bottom footer that has this nice, colored footer at the bottom of the page. And then over here, we have a list of deals. A list of deals, a list of deals. I wonder what HTML element would be good to use for a list of deals. So one option you might come up with is, oh, we should probably use the OL or the UL, right? The listing elements. And each one of these rows over here is an LI. And inside of the LI, I'm going to put a number and an image and an A link and some other images, right? Okay, that's one way to do it. Another way to do it is maybe this is more like a chart in a way, no? Don't you think? This is kind of like tabular data, right? We have a bunch of rows, and in each one of these rows, we have columns. The first column shows the number. The second column shows the image. The third column shows the link and some other information. The last column shows the thumbs up and thumbs down. So maybe you might think of this more as a table. And the interesting thing is that different developers might come up with different answers of how they want to do this. Each one of them might be just as valid. And after you build a page that's as close as possible as you can home make yourself, similar to this, fairly simple page, I think, it's just a heading and a list of deals in the middle that has a number, an image, a link to go to that deal, and if you could even, we'll call this bonus over here. The thumbs up and thumbs up, that'll be bonus for later. For now, just do the number, the image, and the link. You can make up your own deals for now. It doesn't have to be actual deals that exist out there. You're just going to put in some placeholder data, make up your own socks or whatever you want to do. Just find your own images, find your own links, put your own text in it. The point is, have a nice page that has a heading, and maybe the header and the footer, and has a list of deals that people can scroll through and see, oh, look, this is maybe an interesting deal. Let me click on that link. this is maybe an interesting deal. Let me click on that link. And then start Googling around, how can you make the text blue? How can you make the links green? How can you make this text should be small and that text should be larger? And this little part at the end should be even smaller. And how can I make this to be in the middle? And how can I make this to have a circle around it? And Google, how do I do this in CSS? How do I make text color CSS? How do I make text size in CSS? How do I make text position in CSS? How do I make a border, a line between each element in CSS, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? That's the assignment for this time. We did a little bit of an overview of CSS. I don't think we covered everything fully, but hopefully it's enough to get started. And a lot of Googling, a lot of asking in the chat room will probably help a lot as well. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Label, let me hand it over to you in case you have any closing thoughts or things. Yeah.
Just really quick, 2 quick points. One is, if possible, try to work just off of a screenshot. Take a screenshot and then just work off of that. Do your best to not actually go to the website. That's one point, because you'll end up just using it as a crutch. And best to try and struggle with the screenshot and try to make it off of that as much as possible. The second point is, I see a lot of people in the chat suggesting different courses that can help with different things. My personal suggestion is to really try and stay away from the scatterbrain of playing around with a bunch of different courses at once. It's likely to end up not being very helpful for you. It's probably much more helpful to take one thing, one course, and just go with it. Now, because we're only twice a week, you know, and you want to go a little bit ahead, you want to get some extra background, my personal suggestion is to use Free Code Camp. It's very structured, and it's very much work-based and assignment-based, freecodecamp.org. But again, my personal suggestion is to try and stay away from trying a bunch of different tutorials and a bunch of different courses and different free options. Try and stick with just this course and maybe Free Code Camp if you want some extra coursework. That would be my suggestion. It's very natural to want to try a bunch of things because there's so many free courses out there, so many free tutorials, but I would do my best to stay away from that and just try and focus on 1 or 2 courses. Again, probably this one and the assignments that Yisrael gives, and then maybe Free Code Camp if you want some extra coursework.
Is this the right one labeled? freecodecamp.org?
Freecodecamp.org. It's very, very good. It's completely free, and there's a good community around it.
Great, excellent. Yeah, so the idea is basically try as best as you guys can not to actually browse to this website and just look into the elements and see what's going on there. Maybe try to inspect elements on other websites to get a feel for CSS and play around with that and move the numbers up and down and all that. But on this website, just take a screenshot. Actually, I'll take a screenshot myself and post it in the chat room. And you guys can try to work off of that image as if you're a developer that was given a design. Hey, here's a design of a web page. Go ahead, try to implement this with the knowledge that you know how to build HTML and CSS and see as close as you can get with this. And maybe later on, if you're getting stuck, ask questions, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe later on, give yourself a bit of a break and inspect the page a little, but try as much as you can to design it off of just the image of this page, not actually inspecting the HTML inside of the page. All right, thanks so much everyone for joining. See you next time and good luck with the current assignments.